All right, let's kick off this deep dive. We're going to tackle a topic that I know a lot of you are curious about missiles, specifically ballistic and cruise missiles.
Definitely a topic that can get pretty complex.
Exactly. And you know us, we love to get into the details.
Absolutely.
So we've been digging into Encyclopedia Britannica for this one.
Mm.
Get ready for some seriously interesting engineering.
You're not kidding. It's amazing how much technology goes into something that boils down to delivering a payload to a target, right?
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
We tend to focus on the destructive aspect of missiles, but the science and engineering behind them is fascinating. So before we get into all the nitty-gritty, let's start with the basics. What are the key differences between ballistic and cruise missiles?
Well, think about it like this. Imagine you're throwing a baseball.
Okay, got it.
That arc it makes. That's basically a ballistic trajectory, and that's how ballistic missiles work. They're launched with a rocket engine, and once they reach a certain altitude and speed, gravity takes over, pulling them down towards the target.
Okay, I'm picturing that classic up and over motion. So where do cruise missiles come in? They don't follow that same path, do they?
Nope, not at all. Cruise missiles are more like airplanes. They stay within the Earth's atmosphere using jet engines to fly in a relatively straight line towards their target.
So ballistic is like a long throw, and cruise is like a powered flight.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, where did this technology come from? I mean, did someone just look at a baseball and think, let's turn that into a weapon?
Well, the origins might surprise you. Modern missiles actually trace their roots back to World War II Germany, believe it or not.
WWII Germany.
Seriously.
Yep. The V-1 and V-2 rockets they developed were the forerunners of today's sophisticated missiles.
Wow, I did not see that coming. It's hard to believe something developed in the middle of war would have such a lasting impact on technology. Right. It's pretty incredible. Of course, those V weapons were much simpler compared to today's missiles, but they were the first real steps towards long-range, self-guided weapons. And what's interesting is that the limitations of the V-2, especially its accuracy, actually influenced the development of strategic missiles armed with nuclear warheads.
Oh, I see. Because if you can't guarantee a direct hit, you need a bigger bang to ensure destruction.
Exactly. And after the war, you had this race between the US and the Soviet Union to push this technology even further. They actually took very different approaches.
The Cold War. A technological chess match like no other. What were the key differences in their strategies?
Well, the US really focused on streamlining their missiles and making them super accurate. They often used smaller warheads, aiming for precision strikes to minimize collateral damage.
Sort of like the surgical approach to warfare. Hit the target and only the target.
Precisely. The Soviets, though, they went for sheer power. Their missiles were massive, carrying huge warheads with incredible explosive force.
Really? How powerful are we talking?
Some of them exceeded 5 megatons. Think about that, over 300 times the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
Wow, that's a mind-boggling amount of destructive power. Do you have any examples of these Cold War titans, specific missile models?
Absolutely. On the US side, you had the Titan II, a massive 9 megaton missile. Then the Soviets had the SS-7 Sadler, which could carry a warhead of 20 to 25 megatons. Just incredible.
It's hard to even imagine that kind of power. Okay, so we've got a sense of the two main types of missiles and their historical context. Let's get into how they actually work, starting with ballistic missiles. You said they're like throwing a baseball, but obviously there's a lot more to it than just launching something into the air.
Definitely. It all starts with the launch. The rocket engine ignites, propelling the missile upwards. This is what we call the boost phase, all about getting the missile on the right path.
Okay, so that's the initial push, like getting the baseball moving. But what happens then? Does it just sail through the air until it hits its target?
Not quite. To achieve those incredible ranges, ballistic missiles use multiple stages. Imagine it like shedding backpacks as you climb a mountain. Each stage does its job, burns its fuel, and then detaches. This makes the missile lighter and more efficient for the rest of its journey.
Ooh, I like that analogy. It's a strategic shedding process. So what happens when it reaches the peak of its arc? That top point of the throw.
That's the mid-course phase. The rocket engine shuts off, and the missile just coasts through space. This is where the payload comes in, the warhead, the guidance systems, anything designed to evade enemy defenses.
It's like the missile's deadly backpack. So it's launched, climbed, and coasted. What brings it back down to Earth?
You good old gravity. As the missile travels along its trajectory, gravity starts pulling it back towards Earth. That's the terminal phase. It re-enters the atmosphere at incredible speeds and heads straight for its target.
It sounds like a delicate balance of momentum, gravity, and very precise calculations.
You got it.
Speaking of precision, Hitting a target from hundreds or even thousands of miles away can't be easy. What's the secret sauce? What makes sure it lands where it's supposed to?
The guidance system. It's absolutely crucial for accuracy. Most modern missiles use something called inertial navigation.
Inertial navigation. What is that?
Well, think of it like a super accurate internal compass and map all built into the missile.
A compass and map. It sounds super complex.
It is. It uses gyroscopes and accelerometers to constantly measure the missile's movements in 3 dimensions. Kind of like the accelerometer in your phone. You know how it knows when you tilt or rotate it?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Same principle, but on a much more sophisticated level in a missile.
So it's constantly sensing its position and making adjustments to stay on course.
Exactly, like a self-driving car for weapons, you could say.
Wow, that's wild. But just like with self-driving cars, even tiny errors can have huge consequences when we're talking about missiles.
You're absolutely right. That's where something called CEP comes in: circular error, probable.
CEP, that's a new one. Break it down for me.
Imagine a bullseye. CEP tells you the radius of a circle around that bullseye, where there's a 50% chance the missile will land. Smaller CEP means a more accurate missile.
So it's about hitting the target reliably, consistently.
Exactly. But there's also something called bias to consider. That measures how much the missile's average impact point deviates from the actual target.
So even if a missile has a small CEP, meaning its shots are tightly grouped, it could still be consistently off target in a particular direction.
You got it. A really good missile needs both a small CEP and low bias to be effective. It's not just about hitting the general area, but hitting the exact spot over and over.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've gone from this basic idea of throwing a baseball to these incredibly complex systems for guiding missiles. It's amazing how far things have come. But let's rewind for a moment. How did we get from those relatively simple V weapons to the highly accurate intercontinental missiles of today?
Well, to understand that, we need to go back and look at the granddaddy of ballistic missiles, the V-2 rocket.
Back to World War II Germany.
Yep. The V-2, even though it seems simple compared to modern missiles, was a marvel of engineering for its time. And it paved the way for everything that came after.
What were some of the biggest challenges they faced developing the V-2?
One of the biggest was just achieving maximum range. You see, the V-2 was so heavy at liftoff that they couldn't use a sloped launch ramp like we see today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they had to launch it straight up and then have it tilt to the correct angle.
I can't imagine controlling something that massive in flight.
It was a feat. They had to invent systems to control the rocket's roll, pitch, and yaw. They used fins, stabilizing surfaces, even vanes in the exhaust nozzle to steer it.
Sounds like a lot of trial and error.
Oh, definitely. And accuracy, that was a major issue. The changing weight of the rocket as it burned fuel, unpredictable atmospheric conditions, it was really tough to hit a precise target.
So London was more of a general target area rather than a specific building?
Pretty much. But even with its limitations, the V-2 had a huge impact. It caused significant damage and fear during the war. But more importantly, it laid the foundation for future ballistic missile development.
I bet the US and Soviet Union were paying close attention.
Absolutely. They both recognized the V-2's potential, and after the war, there was this race to capture both the remaining V-2 rockets and the German scientists who had developed them.
It sounds like something out of a spy movie. So we've gone from an almost accidental invention born out of wartime necessity to this intense competition between superpowers.
And that's where we get into the development of the first intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs.
Now we're talking serious firepower. Yeah. What were some of those early ICBM models like?
The Soviets actually achieved the first successful launch of a multi-stage ballistic missile, the SS-6 Sapwood, back in 1957. The U.S. followed shortly after with the Thor and Jupiter IRBMs, which were intermediate-range missiles.
Those are kind of stepping stones to true ICBMs.
Exactly. But these early models had their own set of challenges, mainly because they relied on liquid fuel.
Liquid fuel. What was the issue with that?
Well, liquid fuels were really difficult and dangerous to handle. They had to be stored at super low temperatures and pumped into the missile right before launch. Imagine trying to do that with liquid oxygen in the middle of Siberia.
That sounds like a logistical nightmare and not exactly safe.
You're telling me. There were accidents, some of them quite devastating, involving liquid fuel explosions during testing.
It's a reminder of the risks involved in pushing these technological boundaries. Besides fuel issues, were there other limitations with those early ICBMs?
Accuracy was still a big one. Plus, that whole liquid fuel situation meant they took a long time to prepare for launch, making them vulnerable to attack. Not a good thing in a tense Cold War standoff.
I bet both sides were scrambling to improve those early ICBMs, make them faster, safer, more accurate.
You're absolutely right, and that's what led to one of the most important innovations in missile technology. The shift from liquid to solid fuel.
Solid fuel, that sounds like a game changer.
It was. Solid propellants were so much easier and safer to work with. No more complex pumps and storage systems. They could just be stored inside the missile, ready to go at a moment's notice.
So no more fueling up with liquid oxygen and freezing temperatures.
Exactly.
Right.
The U.S. was the first to develop a solid-fueled ICBM, the Minuteman II. It dramatically reduced launch times, which was a huge strategic advantage.
I can imagine the Soviets were quick to follow.
They were. They came out with the SS-13 Savage a few years later.
Okay, so now we have missiles that are faster, safer, and ready to launch at any moment. What other innovations were happening during this time?
Well, this is where things get even more interesting. Remember those massive multi-megaton warheads on the early Soviet missiles?
How could I forget? Hundreds of times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb.
Well, advancements in nuclear weapon technology led to thermonuclear warheads, lighter, more efficient, meaning missiles could carry even more warheads or warheads with even greater explosive power.
So more warheads, more power. Sounds like a recipe for an escalation in the arms race.
It was.
Yeah.
And while those advancements were impressive, they also raised serious concerns about the consequences of a nuclear war. But that's a conversation for another time.
Agreed. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the earliest ballistic missiles to solid fuel and incredibly powerful warheads. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
Absolutely.
Next time, we'll delve into multiple warheads and the countermeasures developed to defend against them. It's a fascinating and somewhat unsettling chapter in the story of missiles.
Looking forward to it.
See you next time.
See you then. Welcome back. Picking up where we left off, advancements in warhead technology led to a whole new era, the era of multiple warheads.
Right, multiple warheads on a single missile. That's a concept that I still find hard to wrap my head around. It seems like such a dramatic escalation.
It was all about strategy. Think about it. Multiple warheads on one missile means you could either dramatically increase your chances of hitting a target, or you could hit multiple targets at once.
Instead of one big punch, you get a whole flurry of punches, all aimed at different points.
Exact.
I can see why that would be so appealing from a military perspective, but how did they actually make it work?
Yeah.
How do you get multiple warheads to hit different targets from a single missile?
Well, it all comes down to clever engineering and a bit of physics. Early on, there were approaches like bundling several warheads together. These were called multiple re-entry vehicles, or MRVs.
MRVs, okay, I'm following.
And the idea with MRVs was they'd re-enter the atmosphere and all strike the same target.
So it's like a shotgun blast.
Yeah.
Multiple projectiles hitting the same spot for maximum impact.
Exactly. The Soviets were the first to experiment with MRVs, using them on their SS-9 SCARP missile.
The SS-9, wasn't that one of their really big missiles?
It was designed to carry massive warheads.
Okay, so MRVs are multiple warheads hitting the same target. You mentioned another approach.
Yeah. The other early innovation was something called the Fractional Orbital Bombardment System, or FOBS for short.
Fractional Orbital Bombardment System.
That sounds ominous. How did that one work? Well, instead of following a typical ballistic trajectory, FOBS missiles were actually launched into a low Earth orbit.
So they were like satellites.
Kind of. They'd circle the globe for a bit before deorbiting and then heading towards their target.
So like a sneak attack from space?
Mm.
I bet that was incredibly difficult to defend against.
It was. It basically bypassed traditional early warning systems. The Soviets used FOBS on their SS-9 missiles, adding a whole other layer of complexity to the Cold War.
It's amazing how fast missile technology was developing during this period. Did the U.S. ever try anything like FOBS?
They considered it, but they ultimately focused on a different approach. Multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles, or MIRVs.
MIRVs, another acronym to keep track of, and it sounds even more complicated than MRVs and FOBS.
MIRVs were a real game changer. With MIRVs, each warhead on a missile could be independently targeted, meaning they could hit totally separate locations.
Wait, so you could launch one missile and hit multiple cities, or an entire military base.
Exactly. It was a whole new level of destructive potential.
How did they even make that work?
They developed a system called a bus, basically a small spacecraft within the missile. This bus would release the MIRVs one by one, maneuvering each warhead onto its own unique trajectory.
A bus in space, carrying nuclear warheads. It sounds like something out of science fiction.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The U.S. first deployed MIRVs on their Minuteman III ICBM back in 1970.
The Minuteman III.
Yep, each one could carry 3 independently targetable MIRVs, each one incredibly accurate.
I'm guessing the Soviets weren't too happy about that.
Not really. They responded by developing their own MIRV-equipped missiles, including the massive SS-18 Satan. That one could carry up to 10 independently targetable warheads.
10 warheads. It's hard to grasp the kind of destructive power we're talking about here. It must have been a turning point in the arms race.
It was. But MIRVs weren't the only area where missile technology was advancing. Both sides were also working on countermeasures, trying to find ways to defend against these increasingly sophisticated weapons.
This is where we get into anti-ballistic missile systems, or ABMs, right?
Right. ABMs were designed to intercept and destroy incoming ballistic missiles.
Sounds like an incredibly challenging task.
It was, but both the U.S. and Soviet Union dedicated a lot of resources to developing these systems.
Well, when you're facing the threat of an ICBM with multiple warheads, any defense would be welcome. What were those early ABM systems like?
They were essentially high-speed missiles themselves, designed to collide with and destroy incoming warheads. The U.S. had the Spartan and Sprint missiles, while the Soviets had the Galosh and Gazelle systems.
Did they actually work? Could they reliably stop an ICBM?
That was the big problem. Early ABM systems were limited in their effectiveness. They were expensive, super complex, and could only target a limited number of incoming warheads.
I bet the whole MIRV situation made things even harder for ABM systems.
You're telling me? With multiple warheads spread out over a wider area, MIRVs were so much harder to intercept. Imagine trying to hit multiple bullets with one bullet.
That sounds almost impossible.
Yeah.
So how did they adapt? Did the arms race just spiral out of control with more and more warheads and countermeasures?
Well, there was definitely a period of intense research and development, but both sides eventually came to the same conclusion. An unconstrained arms race was incredibly dangerous and destabilizing.
It's a relief to hear that cooler heads prevailed. Did they come to any agreements to limit the development of these weapons?
They did. In 1972, the U.S. and Soviet Union signed the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, limiting the number of ABM sites each country could have. It was a big step towards controlling the arms race and reducing the risk of nuclear war.
It sounds like the world was on a knife's edge there for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about ballistic missiles, but what about cruise missiles? How do those differ from ballistic missiles in terms of how they work and their trajectory?
Cruise missiles are very different beasts. While ballistic missiles arc through space, cruise missiles stay within the Earth's atmosphere, kind of like really fast airplanes.
Right, so instead of launching up and over, they stay low and fly directly to their target.
Exactly.
That must give them some unique advantages.
Definitely. One of the biggest is their ability to fly low and slow, often below enemy radar, making them much harder to detect than ballistic missiles.
Like stealth bombers, but in missile form.
Pretty much. They can sneak up on their targets.
But if they're flying like airplanes, they must need a ton of fuel to cover long distances.
You're absolutely right. Fuel efficiency has always been a challenge for long-range cruise missiles.
So how do they overcome that challenge? Did they just make the missiles bigger to carry more fuel?
Well, bigger missiles are also easier to detect, which kind of defeats the purpose.
Right.
The real breakthrough came with the development of more efficient jet engines, particularly turbofan engines.
Ah, so it's like the difference between a gas guzzler and a fuel-efficient hybrid.
Exactly. Those advances in engine technology allowed for smaller, stealthier cruise missiles that could still travel incredible distances.
But fuel isn't the only challenge.
Yeah.
You still have to guide these missiles to their target. And that can't be easy if they're flying so low to the ground.
You're right. Guidance has always been a big hurdle in cruise missile development. Early models, like the German V-1 from World War II, relied on really basic systems like gyroscopes and magnetic compasses.
And I'm guessing something like radio control, like we use for model airplanes, wouldn't be ideal for a weapon that's supposed to be stealthy and operate on its own.
Exactly. Radio control is limited in range and security. You wouldn't want the enemy jamming the signal.
That's true. So what do they use instead?
Modern cruise missiles use a combo of inertial navigation, like ballistic missiles, and terrain contour mapping, or TUCOM for short.
TUCOM. What's that?
It's pretty cool. Picture this.
Mm.
The missile has a detailed digital map of the terrain it's going to fly over.
Yeah.
And as it flies, it uses a radar altimeter to measure the ground elevation below it. It then compares that data to its onboard map.
So it's constantly checking its location and making adjustments to stay on track. Yep. By using TUCOM, cruise missiles can fly incredibly low, hugging the terrain, making them even harder for radar to detect. It's a really effective way to guide a missile over long distances with amazing accuracy.
It's amazing to think we've gone from those basic V-1s to these sophisticated, stealthy cruise missiles that can travel incredible distances using TERCOM to navigate. It's a remarkable journey. But let's go back to World War II for a moment. How do those V-1 rockets fit into the story of modern cruise missiles?
Well, the V-1, even with its limitations, was a key step in developing cruise missile technology. It showed what was possible with an unmanned aircraft carrying a payload. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Its range, accuracy, and that noisy engine made it far from ideal.
You mentioned those limitations earlier. What else made the V-1 challenging to work with?
That pulse jet engine was innovative but super noisy and inefficient. And the guidance system, which relied on a simple gyroscope and compass, was prone to errors, especially over long distances. Plus, it had to fly at a pretty high altitude, making it easy to shoot down. Not exactly the stealthy precision weapon we think of today. I imagine those shortcomings led to a lot of research after the war.
Definitely. The V-1, despite its flaws, really sparked a wave of research and development into cruise missile technology, especially in the U.S.
What were some of those early U.S. programs? Did any of them lead to the cruise missiles we use today?
Well, there was the Snark. It was a long-range subsonic cruise missile designed to carry a nuclear warhead thousands of miles. But it was plagued with technical problems, especially with its engine and guidance systems.
So not exactly a success story.
Not really. It was known for going off course, and its reliability was questionable, to say the least. Then there was the Navajo, which aimed to be a supersonic cruise missile. Really ambitious design, but ultimately it was too complex and expensive, and the ramjet engine, which was crucial for reaching those supersonic speeds, just didn't work as well as they'd hoped.
Sounds like two strikes for early U.S. cruise missile programs. Were there any that actually showed promise?
The Matador program had potential. It was a subsonic, ground-launched missile designed for tactical use. The Matador had a new guidance system called ATRAN, or Automatic Terrain Recognition and Guidance.
ATRAN. That sounds similar to TERCOM, which you explained earlier.
It was. ATRAN used radar map matching to guide the missile, so it could follow a pre-programmed course with much better accuracy than previous systems. The Matador even saw some operational use, but it still had limitations.
So a partial success, but it sounds like there was still a long way to go before cruise missiles reached their full potential.
You're right. It took several more decades of research and development before truly modern cruise missiles emerged, driven by advances in engines, guidance systems, and miniaturization of electronics.
Let's jump ahead a bit. When did those modern cruise missiles finally appear?
The big turning point came in the 1970s and 1980s with the development of the Tomahawk cruise missile.
The Tomahawk. Now, that's a name I recognize. It's been used in so many conflicts over the years.
The Tomahawk was a game changer in many ways. Highly versatile, long range. It could be launched from ships, submarines, even aircraft.
Wow.
And it was incredibly accurate, able to hit targets hundreds of miles away with pinpoint precision.
So this is where it all comes together. Efficient engines, advanced guidance systems, and miniaturized electronics, all packed into a small, stealthy package.
Exactly. The Tomahawk was a huge leap forward in cruise missile technology, and it quickly became a key weapon in the U.S. military's arsenal. It's been used in everything from the Gulf War to the war in Afghanistan.
It's amazing to think about how far we've come from those early clumsy V-1 rockets to these sophisticated, pinpoint-accurate cruise missiles like the Tomahawk.
It really is. It's a testament to human ingenuity and our constant drive to push the boundaries of what's possible.
But it's also a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? All these advancements mean we now have the ability to cause destruction on a scale that was unimaginable just a few decades ago.
It's definitely something to think about. But for now, let's stick with the technology. What are some of the different versions and capabilities of the Tomahawk? You mentioned it was highly versatile.
Right, so it wasn't just a one-size-fits-all weapon.
Nope. It was initially developed with two main versions: an anti-ship missile, designed to take out enemy warships, and a land attack missile designed to strike targets on land. And both versions could be launched from different platforms, which made them incredibly flexible.
So you could have a submarine lurking off the coast, ready to launch Tomahawks at a fleet of ships, or a B-52 bomber carrying Tomahawks deep into enemy territory to hit strategic targets.
Exactly, a whole range of options. And over the years, the Tomahawk has been further developed and upgraded.
So what kinds of upgrades?
Well, now you've got variants with even longer ranges, improved guidance systems, and some can even loiter over a target area, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
Loiter? What do you mean?
Yeah, these loitering cruise missiles can circle for hours, scanning the area with their sensors and waiting for the optimal time to attack.
That's kind of unnerving, like a hawk circling its prey.
It does have that feel to it. It adds another layer of complexity to modern warfare.
It's fascinating how cruise missile technology has come so far, from those noisy, inaccurate V-1s to these stealthy, long-range Tomahawks.
It is, and just like with ballistic missile technology, cruise missile tech has continued to evolve.
So what happened next? What came after the Tomahawk? What's at the cutting edge of cruise missile technology now?
The next big step was the development of stealth technology, making them even harder to detect and intercept.
Stealth technology, like
Yeah.
what we see on the V-2 stealth bomber.
Exactly. By using radar-absorbent materials and carefully shaping the missile to minimize its radar signature, they created cruise missiles that are practically invisible to enemy radar.
So now you have a weapon that can fly hundreds, even thousands of miles, hugging the terrain, all while staying hidden from radar. That's a huge advantage.
Absolutely. Stealth cruise missiles, like the U.S. Advanced Cruise Missile, or ACM, are at the forefront of this technology. They're incredibly difficult to detect and even harder to intercept.
It's remarkable how far missile technology has come. We've gone from those early V weapons to the incredibly sophisticated and stealthy weapons we have today.
It really is incredible.
And it makes you wonder about the future. Where does missile technology go from here? What does the future hold for these powerful weapons?
That's the big question, and it's one we'll dive into in our next segment. We'll look at the future of missile technology and what those advancements might mean for warfare and global security.
Sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack.
We do, but for now, we'll leave it there.
Stay tuned for the final part of our missile deep dive.
See you then.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring the fascinating and sometimes a little unnerving world of missiles.
From their surprisingly connected origins to the incredible technology behind them.
And, we can't talk about missiles without acknowledging their power, the potential for massive destruction. It makes you wonder, what does the future hold for missiles? And what does that mean for all of us?
That's a big question, one that a lot of people are grappling with. Scientists, policymakers, military strategists all around the world.
It's a heavy topic for sure.
Yeah.
But throughout history, we've seen this drive to create weapons that are more powerful, more accurate. It's like a race that never really ends.
Right, and you can bet that trend's going to continue. We're probably going to see missiles that can travel at hypersonic speeds, making them practically impossible to intercept with our current technology.
Hypersonic missiles. That sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
It does, doesn't it? But it's a very real possibility, and it would completely change the landscape of warfare. Imagine missiles that could overwhelm any defense system we have.
Yeah, it's a little terrifying to think about. Are there other advancements on the horizon besides hypersonic speeds?
Well, we might see stealth technology taken to a whole new level. Missiles that are not only small and agile, but practically invisible to radar.
A ghost in the sky, appearing out of nowhere.
Pretty much. And then there's the development of autonomous weapons, autonomous missiles specifically.
Autonomous missiles. You mean missiles that can basically make their own decisions about when and where to strike. That opens up a whole other can of worms, ethically speaking.
It does. The idea of machines making life or death decisions is something we need to really think about as a society. Who's accountable? How do we maintain control? What about the unintended consequences?
It's scary to think about how quickly technology often advances, and sometimes it feels like our ability to understand the implications lags behind.
I agree.
We really need to have these conversations now before it's too late.
Absolutely. The choices we make today will have huge consequences down the line.
It's sobering to think about how far we've come, from those first clunky missiles to the highly advanced weapons we have today. And the future, well, it could be even more advanced, both in exciting ways and potentially dangerous ones.
Technology itself isn't good or bad. It's how we use it that matters. That's the key takeaway here.
We've done a lot of exploring today, starting with your question about how missiles work. And we ended up uncovering a whole world of history, technology, and ethical considerations.
It's been a real deep dive.
We've learned about the mechanics of ballistic and cruise missiles, their evolution over time, the strategic thinking behind them.
And we've touched on some of the big questions, the potential for incredible advancements, but also the risks.
It's a topic that definitely deserves more attention. So
Yeah.
before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last thought. We've seen missile technology advance at an unbelievable pace over the last century. Will this continue? Will we see missiles that are even more accurate, even more powerful? Or will we figure out a way to make them obsolete?
That's a question worth thinking about. What will we choose to do with this technology? What kind of future will we create?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new today, and maybe you're even a little bit inspired to learn more about this complex and fascinating subject.
Keep those questions coming. Stay curious.
Until next time.
See you then.